Hey, welcome back to Sapper Woodworking. This is a really fun project I started working on about a year ago. I ended up was given this big chunk of ash, freshly cut down ash, no less, from a wood supplier of mine, and I've taken it through the process of almost overloading my lathe, because this was a really big, heavy chunk of wood, through the milling process, the drying process, and then I used a technique I've never tried before. It's developed from a Betty Scarpino, and I'll put a link down in the description of a PDF file from her website that gives step-by-step instructions on how to use dye and liming wax to kind of highlight your finished project. And her process is really preferred on woods with an open grain structure, and ash I knew was a perfect candidate for this, so I wanted to get her instructions and follow the process and try a step I've never actually done before. So at this point I've got the bowl kind of milled round on the outside, and I cut down a tendon where I could mount my 4-jaw chuck on the bottom, and then I'll end up flipping the bowl around on the reverse side and kind of milling out a good chunk of the interior, and then I'll end up taking that still green wet wood and putting it in a box to dry over a period of months. Hey, you know what? If you stuck around to a minute and a half through the video, I'd appreciate it if you consider subscribing to my channel. It really helps us with YouTube and getting our videos out and exposed to more people. Really appreciate that. Thanks, and enjoy the video. So I've got this chunk of wood now kind of remounted back on the lathe, and as I start to turn it for the final rounding, you can see that the lathe is actually wobbling back and forth a little bit. That's not the camera, it's actually the lathe. But now that I've got the bowl kind of trued up a little bit, it's spinning much better, and I could increase the speed, which was about 60 RPMs initially, and now I'm probably running 450 RPM. All right, so welcome back to this project. It's been since November 17th, 2020 that I worked on this bowl. I received this rather large chunk of, it was firewood in a big stack from a supplier that I bought some walnut from that day. He gave me the log or the chunk of wood and said, go make a bowl out of this. I cut that in half. I got that other half still sitting underneath my deck. This was rough turn green, and then I stuck this in a box, cardboard box with its own wet shavings, and let the bowl slowly dry. I don't normally let a bowl go an entire year. 6 to 9 months is usually good in my environment for the bowl to dry, but I just haven't got around to working on this. And you can kind of see here where the tailstock support on the original turning has just warped and gone crazy as it's dried out. But of course that'll get turned out in the end, and we're going to mount this back on the lathe and turn this into a finished product, and we'll give this a go and see what it looks like. Stay tuned for more. So here's a really good shot of how much this bowl has warped during the drying process. How dramatically the tailstock support that I'm now spinning with my hand has kind of disfigured. But that's part of the process of slowly drying the bowl. That's actually expected, which is why when I go through this drying process, I always leave about the thickness of the rough cut bowl, about 10% the diameter, to leave me enough material that when I remount the bowl back on the lathe, I can turn off the roundness and have a nice, perfectly circular bowl. Okay, I've got the bowl to its final size and sanded fairly smooth down to 180 grit, and I'm using what is referred to as a jam chuck to smooth out and remove the tendon on the bottom of the bowl. And a jam chuck is just a piece of wood mounted to a faceplate on the lathe, and then I use the tailstock to literally jam the bowl up against that piece of wood, and that supports it well enough that I'm using here a carbide scraper just to remove that little tendon and smooth out the bottom of the bowl for a more professional look. Okay, I've got the bowl pretty much finished. Now, I could just use a standard type of finish that I've done a million times, but I decided to go ahead and risk all that work for a new step and a new process that I've never done before. And as I mentioned earlier, it was commonly used and developed, I believe, by her name is Betty Scarpino. Hopefully I'm pronouncing that correctly, and I'll put a link to her website and an instructional PDF that she provides for free on how to go through this process. And you're essentially using a die to tint the wood, and then you follow up with a coat of liming wax over the bowl, and that kind of embeds that white wax in the open grained wood that's found in ash, which is why it's a really ideal wood for this process. And you end up with a bowl of a patina of whatever color you'd like, with kind of the grain patterns highlighted in that lighter, whiter color that is a remnant of the wax. So it was a fun process. I definitely want to try it again, and hope you like how it turned out. And let's go forward. So overall, this was a really fun project. I'm really liking how this bowl turned out in the end, and that liming wax really highlights the grain. And as you're reading through Betty's instructional PDF on how to do this, really pay attention to the part where she talks about final sanding, because any little tiny defect or nick or sanding scratch left over from the process just gets absolutely enhanced and highlighted by that liming wax. So you have to be really careful in the final sanding process, but the end result is really nice, and I appreciate Betty for offering up those instructions for free. And I encourage you to give this a try to expand your woodworking skills. Again, thanks for watching, and everybody have a great day. Bye-bye.